Patience is its own reward. That's true for many things, but this comic isn't one of them. Well, it was fun while it lasted. The previous 2 issues of Alan Scott Green Lantern had something going, but writer Tim Sheridan completely fumbled the ending. So much for owning Comicsgate. The whole point of this book, according to Tim Sheridan, was to prove that gay characters could be heroes too. But instead of writing that story, Sheridan spent most of the series having Alan Scott mope around only caring about himself and his lost love. We don't see him doing anything heroic. He's in the Green Lantern suit, but he never acts the part. There was barely any action in the miniseries until the last 3 issues. If Sheridan wanted to do a tragic hero story, he should have done something in the vein of the Silver Surfer. But Sheridan seemed more concerned with validating homosexuality than letting the story show that there's nothing wrong with being gay. Show Alan Scott being a hero and a good person, and that would show that his sexuality isn't a flaw or a problem. Show Alan Scott being more concerned about the men in his life than his own circumstances, show him defending them, fighting for them, putting himself at risk, and that would show that he's worthy of the power of the Green Flame. That wouldn't get around the problem of changing the sexuality of a well-established character with nearly 80 years of story showing him being super straight, but it would at least make him an interesting character. Sheridan seemed to get that idea in the previous 2 issues, but in the finale, he dropped the ball and went back to Alan Scott's woe is me routine and rushed the ending. The issue opens with this present-day scene that comes out of nowhere. I checked, and this isn't referenced in the previous issues. The previous issue only had some journal narration, but this opening has nothing to do with that, at least not directly. I think people familiar with Alan Scott can guess who the shadow figure is, but for those who don't know, this is Obsidian, Alan's son. He also has a daughter, Jade, who's Obsidian's twin. Obsidian is also gay. That's why he's in the comic, but Jade is not. Now, it's not impossible for a gay parent to also have a gay child. The issue here is that the whole point of making Obsidian gay was to have an openly gay character. However, when DC Soft rebooted their universe with the New 52, Golden Age heroes like Alan Scott were erased, and new versions of them got their own universe, essentially erasing Obsidian and Jade from the continuity. This is probably why the rebooted version of Alan Scott was made gay. Keep in mind, the New 52 Alan Scott is a separate character from the Golden Age Alan Scott. So when the original universe was restored and the original Alan Scott brought back into the continuity, there was no reason to retcon him into also being gay. You have Obsidian, who barely gets any attention. You could simply make a book about him. But that's not how this works, because the intent isn't on telling stories featuring gay characters. It's just having as many gay characters as possible so people can score some backpats and brownie points. Characters like Obsidian get outed and then forgotten because no one's really interested in them. That's why more well-known characters like Tim Drake and John Kent get outed. They bring in more attention, not from readers, no one buys the books, but from social media and regular media. Then you have someone like Alan Scott, who's been around forever, and the goal is the same: out him so they can check a box. But then you have to explain it, and that's where things fall apart because there's no way to logically explain away 8 decades of stories without simply saying that that wasn't the same guy. That's the problem for Sheridan. The miniseries is an attempt to explain the retcon, and it just failed because Sheridan can't get out of his own way, and the retcon doesn't make any sense. Speaking of not making any sense, you know that fight between the JSA and the Crimson Host from the last issue? You know how it seemed like it was built into an epic battle? Yeah, not so much. So, the JSA just plow through the Crimson Host. The Russians are no challenge for them. Well, except for Alan Scott. Because, despite everything we saw Green Lantern do in the previous 2 issues, he goes back to being mopey and inept. So when Vlad tells Alan to create constructs using the Green Lantern ring, Alan just can't get it up, and he gets hammered by Major Blaze. Green Lantern just got recharged, he's supposed to be full of confidence now that he knows how his powers work, but then he instantly gets taken out. Okay. Vlad tries to come in for the save, but Major Blaze beats him to death in 3 punches. That pisses Alan off and he finally attacks, but Major Blaze easily blocks it. Now, this is where it gets really confusing, because Green Lantern's attack didn't work, but at the end of the page, he's able to trap the Crimson Host in an energy field. But then it gets more confusing because the Crimson Host just gives up. And on top of that, when Major Blaze says just kill us and be done with it, he's smirking, but he doesn't do anything. None of them do. So it's not clear if he's actually given up or just being cocky. Not that it matters, because the Crimson Flame resurrects Vlad, and he kills the Crimson Host. The JSA are shocked, and Alan's like, you didn't need to do that. But how does he know this when it's not clear if the Crimson Hosts were actually beaten or not? I read it 4 times. I legit can't tell what's happening here. And then to make it worse, Alan just takes Vlad's ring, and that's supposed to depower him, even though Vlad told Alan that the Crimson Flame is now a part of him and that he was able to use the power without the ring and lantern. In fact, he only created the ring and lantern to mimic the Green Lantern, so taking the ring does fuck all. Vlad just told Alan this story. In their time, this happened maybe 20 minutes ago. That book came out back in January. I haven't read it in 4 months and I still remember this. Sheridan, how did you forget your own plot point? Anyway, Vlad winds up in prison, and Alan goes in for a chat, and this is the first time I realize the story is set before the US entered World War II. I don't know why I thought it was after the war, but I did. Alan mentions that Hitler invaded Russia and that he's probably looking for the Red Labs to get his hands on the Crimson Flame. Then Vlad mentions again that Alan can use his powers to travel through time. I guess this is referencing something from another book. I know Jeff Johns has this whole soft retcons thing going on, where he's adding in all these sidekicks to Golden Age characters. I don't know if that's what it's referencing, or if it's just a general reference to Green Lantern's abilities. There's no context given, so if you don't know, you don't know. Then Alan gives another one of his woe is me speeches about his and Vlad's sexuality, and when Alan leaves, Vlad shows that he can use a Crimson Flame without a ring, but we already knew that, so it's not all that cool. The same goes for Alan's showdown with J. Edgar Hoover. Alan realizes that Vlad is lying about his powers. Hoover wants Alan to go back and try again, but Alan refuses, so Hoover threatens him, and Alan finally finds a pair and threatens Hoover back by saying, "If you out me, then I'll out you, and the American public will turn on you and probably kill you, and I'll turn the whole gay community against you too." I think that first part is because Tim Sheridan saw my videos, because it's pretty close to what I said Alan should do. The second part, the whole raising a gay army, that's probably what Sheridan originally intended, and it's really silly. Dude, the story takes place in 1941. They were still drugging and chemically castrating men for being gay. There's no way Hoover would take that threat seriously, not in that year, and definitely not against Hoover, who had his hands in and on everything and everyone. Finally, we get to the end, where Sheridan decides to retcon Alan Scott's history to try to explain changing his sexuality. First, we learn that Vlad escaped and it's impossible for Alan to find him. It's a throwaway moment that creates a whole new problem because the Crimson Flame, or Red Lantern, is a new character. We have 80 years of Alan Scott's stories where Vlad is never mentioned, so the idea that Alan spent years searching for him doesn't fly. Then Obsidian asks the obvious. If Alan was so in love with Vlad, why did Alan wind up with Rose and Molly, his 2 wives? I'm just going to read what Alan Scott says because... yeah, I'm just going to read it. Quote, "I convinced myself my interest in men like Vladimir Sokov was just a trick of the light, a way for my human mind to make sense of the cosmic bond between my emerald flame and the crimson one he embodied. I told myself a story, that I was a straight man being confused by the pull of an incredible celestial power. Eventually, I realized the celestial power in question wasn't a magic space flame, but regular old love." And when Obsidian brings up that this was obvious because Alan fell in love with Vlad before they got their powers, Alan agrees. Okay, so to recap, Alan Scott punks J. Edgar Hoover by basically saying, "I'm here, I'm queer, get over it." And then immediately afterwards tries to convince himself that he's actually a straight man who was made gay because of cosmic magic. That's how you explain away Alan Scott's 80-year history of shagging women. He thinks the space flame made him gay after he gave a speech saying he's not ashamed of his sexuality. Right. How in the hell did you think that was a good idea? The easiest thing to do would have been to either say Alan Scott was bisexual or cut out the confrontation with Hoover and have Alan live as a straight dude because of the trauma he experienced over Vlad. You know, like what happens in the real world. It's literally right in front of Sheridan, and he just ran right by it for the most ridiculous explanation possible. This fool convinced himself he caught the gay from space magic because he and another man shared the power. Just all kinds of stupid. All of them. And it gets worse because Obsidian brings up the time travel thing again, and Alan's explanation for whether he's used the power is that he learned to control it and then went back in time and left himself a message, which is the narration we've seen throughout the miniseries, and to watch Obsidian and Jade grow up since Molly put him in foster care. There's just a slight problem. Both the twins were abused as kids. Obsidian was abused in a foster home, and Jade discovered her powers when someone tried to rape her. So, what we're supposed to believe is that Alan Scott traveled through time to watch his kids grow up, and he either A, conveniently missed every time they were abused, or B, stood by and watched. I thought his name was a Green Lantern, not God. Tim Sheridan, did you even think about it for 2 seconds? Jade and Obsidian are known for being victims of child abuse. Why would you have Alan Scott go back in time but do nothing to stop it? Either Sheridan didn't know about it, this has been retconned out of their history but no one ever mentioned it, or it never crossed Sheridan's mind because he was too busy trying to make a point about being gay. And that's it, I'm done. I am done. I give Sheridan credit for the 2 issues that actually worked, but overall this miniseries was just bad. Sheridan was more concerned with the message than telling a good story or writing an interesting character or making a character an actual superhero. The attempt to retcon Alan Scott's sexuality failed because the change doesn't make any sense in context to the stories already told about the character, his wives, and his children. It would have been better to either give Obsidian his own miniseries or tell a story about the New 52 Alan Scott. There was no reason to retcon yet another character's sexuality when there are plenty of existing gay characters who never get their own stories. It also didn't make any sense to use the miniseries as an attack on Comicsgate because none of those people would ever buy the book, like the book, or even care that Sheridan was trying to stick it to them. The miniseries got nothing but low sales and no traction with the supposed audience craving the stories. The one plus for the book is a solid art. Cyan Tormey delivered nothing but the best in every issue. I look forward to seeing what else Tormey has to offer. As for Sheridan, whatever he was doing with this miniseries, it didn't work, and he should try something else. The trick to writing interesting, believable, and relatable gay characters is to treat them as people, not as representatives of their sexuality. The goal shouldn't be to get backpass from people obsessed with their sexuality and identity, or to piss off people who hate the queers. The goal should be to get to the point where you never need to mention the character's sexuality. You can just show the character going about their life and no one cares. The way you do that is by writing the stories that way, not by playing identity politics. But what do I know? I'm just some guy.